Millionaire's mistress paid a doctor to lie pregnant wife, was declared infertile and locked away. A gilded cage can be just as cruel as any prison, especially when it's built on secrets and deception. Within the shadowy halls of the Harrington mansion, one horrifying lie changed the fate of an entire family. Melissa Harrington, a kind-hearted woman who fell in love with a charismatic multi-millionaire, was declared infertile by a prestigious doctor. Overnight, she was locked away under the guise of illness. Little did anyone know, she was very much pregnant. The culprit, her husband's own mistress, driven by greed and envy, willing to pay any price to seize Melissa's place. This is the shocking, twisted tale that unfolds within these walls. Melissa Harrington was never one to seek the spotlight. She was the shy observer in every social gathering, far happier to listen to others than speak about herself. When she met James Harrington at a charity gala in London, she was far from the polished, elegant women he'd dated in the past. And yet, something about her genuine warmth and sincere curiosity hooked him at once. Within months, James, heir to the Harrington estate, known for its prestigious real estate ventures, asked for her hand in marriage. Their union became front-page news in every magazine that pored over wealthy families' affairs. Despite the sudden attention, Melissa remained humble and sweet. James, taken by her gentleness, found himself transforming from a carefree bachelor into a more devoted family man. Yet behind the veneer of fairy tale romance loomed the watchful eyes of those who were less than pleased with James's choice. At the top of that list was Caroline Bishop, an ambitious and sometimes ruthless socialite who had been James's on and off companion before Melissa ever came into the picture. Caroline wanted what Melissa now possessed: the Harrington name, the opulent lifestyle, and most importantly, James himself. From the moment she discovered James had married Melissa, Caroline's heart seethed with envy. She attempted to maintain her status in James's life under the guise of an old friend, and the Harrington family tolerated her presence. Rumors floated around that Caroline had once saved James's father from a public scandal, so the family felt indebted to her in some way. Caroline used that veneer of gratitude to stay dangerously close. Melissa, trusting and unaccustomed to the manipulations of high society, never believed Caroline posed any real threat. She would invite Caroline to events, chat politely over tea, and even confide in her about her hopes for starting a family with James. But while Melissa saw a friend, Caroline saw an opportunity. One evening, months into the marriage, Melissa began feeling queasy. The staff discreetly called in the family doctor, Dr. Howard Knight, a renowned obstetrician who had worked with the Harringtons for years. Much to Melissa's joy, the doctor confirmed she was pregnant. She was elated to share the news with James, who had been away handling business deals in Monaco, hoping to delight him upon his return. But in her joy, Melissa made a mistake. She mentioned the pregnancy to Caroline, who had dropped by unannounced. Caroline's face paled, and then she forced an artificial smile. "Melissa, I'm so happy for you," she exclaimed, though her heart roiled with jealousy. All the while her mind raced, plotting how to unravel Melissa's happiness. She could not stand the thought of the demure and soft-spoken Melissa bearing the heir to the Harrington fortune. If Caroline's path back to James was already narrow, a child would slam that door shut forever. In the days that followed, Melissa remained blissfully unaware, thinking Caroline was sincere. She would whisper shyly to the staff, "I'm going to tell James over a candlelit dinner. It's going to be perfect." But fate had other ideas. Caroline had already begun planting seeds of suspicion, suggesting to the Harrington family that Melissa might be unstable, that she was under undue stress and needed medical supervision. And then, with quiet cunning, Caroline set her grand plan in motion. She reached out to a certain doctor, Richard Johnson, a specialist known among London's elite for his willingness to bend the truth for the right price. Caroline was prepared to pay handsomely for a single purpose: to declare that Melissa was infertile, mentally unstable, and in dire need of institutional care. That phone call set off a chain of events that would plunge Melissa into a nightmare and turn the Harrington mansion into a battlefield of lies. Caroline wasted no time. On a cold, rainy afternoon, she discreetly arranged a private meeting with Dr. Richard Johnson at an upscale cafe in Mayfair. She chose a corner table shrouded in shadows, away from prying eyes. Dr. Johnson arrived precisely on time, wearing a polished grey suit and carrying a leather briefcase. His stern grey eyes scanned the area before he took a seat. He recognized Caroline from the countless social functions he'd attended under the Harrington sponsorship. He knew she had influence and a wealth of resources at her disposal. Still, the moral lines Dr. Johnson was about to cross made him uneasy, but with crippling debt from a failed investment and a lifestyle he was desperate to uphold, he arrived to hear her out. Caroline leaned forward, speaking in hushed tones. "I'll get right to the point, Doctor. My dear friend, Melissa Harrington, is, shall we say, unstable. She's been hallucinating about being pregnant. James Harrington is too busy to see it, and he's away too often to notice her deteriorating condition." She paused, gauging his reaction. Then she continued, "I'm concerned for her safety. We all are. But the only way to get her the help she needs, to protect the family's reputation, is if you were to sign documentation stating she's mentally unsound and that she's unable to conceive." Dr. Johnson's eyebrows shot up. He tapped the table lightly, contemplating the moral cost. "That is quite a request," he said slowly. "I risk my entire career if this comes out. You do realize that, Miss Bishop?" Caroline nodded calmly. "Of course, Doctor, which is why you'll be generously compensated. I can arrange for £500,000 to be deposited into an account of your choosing, tax-free, no questions asked." He swallowed, his mind calculating the payoff versus the risk. £500,000 would erase his debts and allow him a fresh start. He leaned back, pressing his lips into a thin line. "If I do this, you must ensure the Harringtons never suspect my involvement and that no other medical professional is allowed near her without me overseeing the process." Caroline nodded. "You'll be her sole practitioner. I'll handle the rest." Thus, a diabolical partnership was formed. Dr. Johnson began forging medical documents, claiming Melissa suffered from severe delusions, that she believed she was pregnant when in fact she was not, and even if she were, her body was allegedly incapable of carrying a child to term. The next step was to present this false evidence to James and the Harrington family. A week later, James returned from his business trip to find the mansion buzzing with rumors and concern. Caroline, her face mask-like in its sympathy, immediately approached him. "James, the first, so glad you're back. Melissa's health has taken a turn for the worse." He stiffened, alarmed. "What do you mean?" he demanded. Caroline's eyes filled with crocodile tears. "She's insisted she's pregnant, but the doctor says it's impossible. She's become erratic, crying, lashing out at the staff. Please, you have to help her." James rushed upstairs to find Melissa locked in her bedroom, tears streaming down her face. As soon as she saw her husband, she began crying with relief. "James, I'm pregnant," she breathed. "I have proof, Dr. Knight told me." But Dr. Knight was nowhere to be found. He had conveniently left on holiday, or so the staff had been told. In his place stood Dr. Johnson, who produced official-looking documents. Without Dr. Knight to confirm the original diagnosis, James found himself adrift. He studied the documents, his confusion mounting. They spoke of hysteria, delusions, and an empty uterus. James wanted to believe his wife, But the official tests seemed to prove otherwise. His family members, aware of how these rumors could damage the Harrington name, urged him to take caution. Caroline seized the moment, posing as the concerned friend. "James, none of us want to see Melissa suffer, but there's a chance her mental health is in jeopardy. Dr. Johnson says that, for her own safety, she should be placed under supervised care until she's stable. You must protect her." Caught between loyalty to his wife and the alleged professional opinions, James hesitated. Melissa's tearful pleas that she was indeed pregnant only made her appear more frantic in the face of the contradictory reports. Within days, under Dr. Johnson's guidance, James reluctantly arranged for Melissa to be admitted to a private facility, a luxurious but hidden place where wealthy families discreetly handled their problems. It was there that Melissa's nightmare would escalate, unbeknownst to her husband, who believed he was doing what was best for her. And in the background, Caroline smiled, confident her plan to usurp Melissa's place was only just beginning. Nestled behind high walls and lush gardens, the Westwood Serenity Clinic resembled more a grand estate than a mental health facility. Yet once admitted, patients found themselves under strict supervision, with every move monitored. When Melissa first arrived, her world crashed into confusion and despair. She'd never felt so alone. On her first night, she curled up in bed, pressing a trembling hand against her still, flat stomach. She knew the baby was there. She could feel subtle shifts and strange cravings, the small signs she'd been thrilled to discover just weeks before. She whispered to herself, "I have to stay strong for both of us." Meanwhile, Dr. Johnson worked swiftly. He manipulated the clinic's internal records so that no one would question the diagnosis. Whenever a nurse raised an eyebrow at Melissa's insistence she was pregnant, he shut them down with a cool, "Hallucinations are part of her condition. She's severely distressed, and we must refrain from indulging her delusions." His medical clout in London's elite circles ensured few dared to challenge him. Days blurred into weeks, and Caroline moved into the Harrington mansion, pretending it was only to support James during this difficult time. While James busied himself with business ventures, Caroline inserted herself into every aspect of his daily life, picking out his suits, arranging dinners, and smoothing over any public suspicion about Melissa's abrupt absence. When the staff grew wary, she issued stern looks that radiated the silent message, "Remember your place." Yet James struggled with guilt. He missed Melissa's kindness, her gentle laughter. Late at night, he found himself pacing the halls, recalling the morning she'd told him about Dr. Knight's test results. Had she really been pregnant, or was it a phantom of her own longing? James was haunted by nightmares, Melissa's tearful eyes, her pleas for him to believe her. But whenever he brought these fears to Dr. Johnson, he was reassured that everything pointed to a delusion, and that the best course was to continue her therapy at Westwood Serenity Clinic. In truth, Melissa was not receiving therapy. She was locked away in a private wing, fed sedation pills under the guise of treatment. Any mention of pregnancy was dismissed, and she was too exhausted to resist. Yet her spirit remained resolute. During her lucid moments, she would scribble letters to James, describing every symptom she felt, her change in appetite, the fluttering movements within her. She prayed these letters would somehow make their way out. She confided in a nurse named Evangeline, a kindly soul who had joined the clinic recently and hadn't yet been corrupted by Dr. Johnson's orders. Evangeline noticed strange inconsistencies in Melissa's records. Y was a perfectly healthy woman who showed no previous signs of mental illness, suddenly declared insane? Why did the official tests show no pregnancy, when Evangeline saw the subtle signs that Melissa's body was indeed changing? One night, Evangeline witnessed Melissa in her bathroom, retching from morning sickness. That was no delusion. Fueled by curiosity and empathy, Evangeline quietly started an investigation of her own. She found that internal memos regarding Melissa's condition had been replaced. Lab results, ones that might indicate pregnancy, were missing. Dr. Johnson's signature was on every key piece of paperwork. Even more bizarrely, the older staff who had served at the clinic for years seemed to avoid discussing Melissa at all, as though they were frightened of the scandal that could erupt if the truth were exposed. Evangeline knew she was taking a great risk, but she also realized that if she did nothing, Melissa might lose her child, or worse. One evening, under the cover of darkness, she snuck into the administrative office. With shaky hands, she rifled through filing cabinets until she located Melissa's file. Her heart hammered when she saw the inconsistencies, pages of contradictory test results, dates that didn't match up, and an original hospital reference from Dr. Howard Knight that was never processed. Evangeline carefully took pictures of every document she deemed suspicious. She vowed to do whatever was necessary to help Melissa, but she was only one small nurse against the formidable power of Dr. Johnson and the Harrington influence, not to mention Caroline's cunning manipulations. She had no idea that outside those clinic walls, events were unfolding that would soon bring the entire scandal dangerously close to the surface. If only James could see these documents, or if Dr. Knight would return. But time was running out. Melissa's pregnancy was progressing. Should it reach a point where the pregnancy was undeniable, Dr. Johnson might resort to drastic measures to hide the truth. For Caroline, the biggest threat now was Melissa's growing belly and the unstoppable fact that she was carrying the Harrington heir. The days of Melissa's confinement rolled steadily onward, and she marked them with a small pencil on the edge of her nightstand. Each mark represented her determination to endure. She refused to let despair swallow her. Whenever she had the slightest opportunity, she tried to reach James. She would scribble frantic notes, passing them to Evangeline in hopes they might find their way out. She prayed for a miracle, that James would walk through the clinic door and whisk her away, that Dr. Knight would return from wherever he'd gone, that Caroline's schemes would crumble. Meanwhile, back at the Harrington mansion, Caroline was carefully weaving herself deeper into James's life. She'd subtly taken over Melissa's seat at the dinner table, ensuring that James came to rely on her presence. She convinced him that stepping out in public together, attending galas or conferences, would help quash rumors about the family's tragedy. The tabloids buzzed with speculation, some gossip columns even claiming that James had divorced Melissa and was already engaged to Caroline. Although those were unsubstantiated rumors, Caroline did nothing to quell them. Let the world think what it wanted. Her plan was nearing fruition. James, however, was not entirely blind. He noticed how Caroline was always present, how she seemed to steer every conversation about Melissa back to her supposed delusions. And then there were the whispers among the staff's small snippets he caught in passing. She didn't seem ill to me. Caroline told me not to talk about Miss Melissa, Dr. Knight's sudden holiday is so strange. These seeds of doubt took root in James's mind. Late one evening, James retreated to his father's old study, a mahogany-paneled room filled with dusty leather-bound books and an imposing oak desk. Light from a single lamp cast flickering shadows across the walls. This was the first time he'd been alone in weeks, and he intended to find answers. Something simply felt off. He removed from a locked drawer the last letter he'd received from Melissa before she was admitted. In it, she wrote of her excitement at being pregnant, of the plans she'd made to decorate a nursery. The language was so lucid, so coherent. This was not the letter of a woman in the grips of hysteria. James read it 3 times, and each time the gnawing suspicion in his gut grew stronger. Why had he never spoken with Dr. Knight directly? Why had he simply taken Dr. Johnson at his word? Determined to find a clue, James decided to track down Dr. Howard Knight. If the official story was that Dr. Knight was on holiday, James wanted to know exactly where. He placed a call to a friend in Monaco, William Barrett, who had connections to private investigators throughout Europe. William's voice crackled through the phone line. "Leave it to me, old friend. I'll find Dr. Knight for you." Over the next few days, James carried on with a facade of normalcy while William quietly pulled on every thread. It wasn't long before he located Dr. Knight, not on holiday in Greece, as Dr. Johnson claimed, but recovering from a mysterious assault in a private hospital in Manchester. The details were murky. Dr. Knight had been attacked shortly after diagnosing Melissa's pregnancy, then forced to leave his practice for his own safety, or so he'd confided to the hospital staff. Horrified, James realized that something far more sinister was going on. He confronted Dr. Johnson in the Harrington Mansion's foyer. "I heard, Doctor. Knight is in Manchester, not on holiday," he said, voice trembling with controlled rage. "Care to explain?" Dr. Johnson's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly composed himself. He must have changed his plans, James. The first only relayed what I was told." James studied him for a moment, his chest tight with suspicion. He responded with forced politeness. "Then I'll make the journey to Manchester. The first need a second opinion. I want to confirm Melissa's condition." Caroline, who had been eavesdropping from the hallway, stepped in. "James, why dig up the past?" Dr. Knight clearly had some questionable practices. "The entire family trusts Dr. Johnson. Haven't you seen how well Melissa is doing at the clinic? She's stable, safe. Let's not disrupt her progress." But James was no longer swayed by Caroline's soft words or her painted smile. He had resolved to learn the truth for himself, and that decision marked the beginning of his rebellion against the deception that had blanketed the Harrington household. As James stormed out to prepare for his trip, Caroline was left fuming in silent rage. If James spoke to Dr. Knight, their entire facade might come crashing down. She hurried to phone Dr. Johnson. "He's going to see Dr. Knight," she spat, voice tight with panic. "We need a solution now." Meanwhile, at the Westwood Serenity Clinic, Evangeline finally managed to smuggle out one of Melissa's letters. She entrusted it to an old acquaintance who worked at a bakery near the Harrington estate. From there, the letter would hopefully find its way to James Harrington's hands. Fate, it seemed, was no longer on Caroline's side. The walls of deception were beginning to crack, and it was only a matter of time before the truth demanded to be set free. James's journey to Manchester was punctuated by a growing sense of dread. He had decided to travel alone, telling no one but his trusted friend William Barrett. Upon arriving, he found Dr. Knight under tight security in a modest, privately funded medical facility. According to the attending nurse, the doctor had been attacked in his home, and the assailant left few traces, no forced entry, no stolen valuables. It was a warning. Dr. Knight's injuries were healing, though he still bore bruises on his arms and face. When James stepped into the room, he barely recognized the once confident physician. Dr. Knight looked exhausted, eyes shadowed with fear, but he managed a tight-lipped smile upon seeing James. "Mr. Harrington, I was wondering when you'd come," Dr. Knight said, his voice weak but resolute. James took a seat beside the bed. "I need the truth," he said simply, "about Melissa, about your diagnosis, and about this supposed delusion, Doctor." Knight exhaled shakily, glancing around as though expecting someone to burst in and silence him. "I confirmed Melissa's pregnancy myself," he said, his tone hushed but urgent. "She's healthy, or at least she was when I last saw her. The baby was in its early stages, but there was no doubt. I gave her the good news and left her with instructions to take prenatal vitamins." James felt a chill run through him, remembering how Caroline, Dr. Johnson, and even his own family had insisted otherwise. Then why did you vanish? I was visited by two men the following night, claiming they were Harrington family associates, but I doubt that was true, Dr. Knight explained, wincing at the memory. They demanded I alter my records and say Melissa wasn't pregnant, that she'd been hallucinating. I refused. That's when they threatened me. I was assaulted in my own home, but I managed to call the police. The men fled, but the damage was done. I was warned not to speak, or they'd come after me again, and possibly after my family. James's hands clenched into fists. Who would do something like that? Dr. Knight rubbed a bruised knuckle. I don't know exactly, but the name Caroline Bishop came up. One of them mentioned she'd pay us generously to keep the story quiet. James could hardly breathe. The puzzle pieces snapped into place, forming an ugly picture. Caroline wanted Melissa declared infertile, wanted her locked up, all to position herself in James's life. The betrayal was overwhelming. He thanked Dr. Knight for his honesty and assured him he would do whatever he could to keep him safe. Before leaving, James made a promise. I'll expose them. This won't go unpunished, Doctor. Knight nodded gratefully, relief evident in his eyes. As James walked out into the crisp Manchester air, he called William. It's all true, he said, voice trembling with both fury and fear. Melissa was telling the truth. She's pregnant. William sighed, a mix of anger and relief. What's your next move? I'm going to get my wife, James stated simply. And then I'll deal with Caroline and Dr. Johnson once and for all. Back at the mansion, Caroline was growing increasingly nervous. She sensed the shift in James's demeanor before he left for Manchester. Now, he was returning likely armed with damaging knowledge. Doctor. Johnson had already cautioned her that if James confirmed Melissa's pregnancy, the entire ruse would collapse. That meant they needed to act swiftly and decisively. Caroline's panic soared when she received a cryptic message from Dr. Johnson. We may need to expedite the situation. If Melissa's belly shows signs of pregnancy, it will be harder to deny. I have certain measures to ensure she doesn't carry to term, but we need your authorization. She stared at the message, heart hammering. It was one thing to lock Melissa away, to spread false rumors of her infertility. But to harm an unborn child? That crossed a line even Caroline wasn't sure she could stomach. Still, her desperation to maintain control over James, over her chance at the Harrington fortune, was all-consuming. She swallowed hard, hands trembling, and typed a response. Do what needs to be done. Make sure she can't claim any heir. Meanwhile, inside Westwood's Serenity Clinic, Evangeline found Melissa in the common area, staring out a barred window. The nurse gently tapped her shoulder. I managed to pass your letter along, she whispered. I think it reached someone who can get it to your husband. Melissa's tired eyes brightened. Do you think he'll come? Evangeline squeezed her hand. I can't promise, but I have a good feeling. Unbeknownst to them both, danger was lurking in every corner. Now that James was armed with the truth, Caroline and Dr. Johnson had ramped up their plan. If they couldn't fool the world into believing Melissa was never pregnant, they might resort to ensuring she wasn't pregnant anymore. The stakes had never been higher. All that remained was a final confrontation, a storm of truth that would shake the foundations of everything the Harringtons thought they knew. James returned to London with a searing determination. He marched into the Harrington mansion, every step echoing with purpose. Before Caroline could greet him, he barked at the staff to gather in the main hall. His voice resounded through the corridors, a clarion call of authority that demanded obedience. The staff, many of whom had been cowed by Caroline, gathered apprehensively. When Caroline appeared, wearing a forced smile and gliding down the marble staircase, James cut her off with an icy glare. Where is my wife? He demanded. Where is Melissa? Caroline blinked, her composure faltering momentarily. James, you know she's at the clinic. She needs... He raised a hand to silence her. "I know the truth, Caroline. I've spoken with Dr. Knight." A hush fell over the hall. Even the staff, who had been uncertain of the rumors, felt a shift in the air, a sense that the house of cards was about to topple. Caroline swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. "Dr. Knight, he's discredited James. He's enough." James barked, eyes blazing. "I will not have you lie to my face any more." He turned to the staff. "Pack Caroline Bishop's things. She's to leave the mansion immediately." Caroline's face blanched. "James, you can't do this." "I've been your friend." James advanced a step, anger unmasked. "You orchestrated this scheme to lock my pregnant wife away, to declare her insane, and to bribe a doctor to lie. Then you had Dr. Knight assaulted. Do you deny it?" For a moment, Caroline seemed at a loss for words, her hands trembling. Then she sneered, dropping all pretense of innocence. "You're making a mistake, James," she said coldly. "You have no idea what you're up against." "I know enough," he snapped. "If you refuse to leave now, I'll call the authorities. I have Dr. Knight's testimony. I have documents that prove Melissa is pregnant. You and Dr. Johnson are finished." Caroline, seeing that bluffing further was futile, stormed out of the mansion, her heels clacking on the marble. Her parting words thrown over her shoulder were, "You'll regret this." As soon as she was gone, James wasted no time. He contacted William Barrett again, asking him to prepare legal action and to gather any evidence needed to protect Melissa. Next, James arranged for a car to take him to Westwood Serenity Clinic. In the meantime, Caroline, furious and cornered, raced to Dr. Johnson's private office. She burst in without knocking. "He knows everything," she hissed. "We have to move now." "He's headed to the clinic." Dr. Johnson, who had been pacing the room, ran a hand through his hair. "I already administered something to weaken Melissa. If she loses the baby, it'll be too late for James to do anything. But we need time for the drug to take effect. We can't let him see her until it does." Caroline's stomach churned with guilt and fear, but she pressed on, then stalled him. "I'll give you whatever you need. Just make sure the pregnancy is ended before James arrives." At that, Dr. Johnson nodded grimly, picking up his phone to instruct the clinic staff. He had certain loyal employees there who had turned a blind eye to his unethical treatments. But what he didn't realize was that Evangeline, the nurse with a conscience, had been monitoring his calls and documents closely. She overheard the plan, the forced miscarriage that Dr. Johnson intended to orchestrate. Heart-pounding, Evangeline rushed to Melissa's room. "Melissa, they're trying to hurt you. We must get you out of here." Melissa, pale and disoriented from the sedatives, struggled to stand. I feel so weak," she murmured. Evangeline grabbed her arm. "Listen, you've been drugged, but we have to move now. James is on his way. But we can't wait. Dr. Johnson wants to harm your baby." Summoning every last bit of willpower, Melissa let Evangeline help her down the corridor. The clinic at night was eerily silent. Most of the staff were either off duty or aligned with Dr. Johnson. Quickly, they ducked into a laundry room and found a cart big enough for Melissa to hide in. Evangeline tossed some clean sheets on top, determined to smuggle her patient out. They crept through the back halls, the wheels of the cart squeaking ominously. At each intersection, Evangeline peeked around corners, praying not to encounter any of Dr. Johnson's subordinates. Meanwhile, Melissa fought against waves of dizziness. She clutched her abdomen, silently willing her baby to hold on. Outside, the wind whipped through the tall hedges. A single security guard patrolled the rear exit. Evangeline whispered instructions, motioning for Melissa to remain still under the sheets. She approached the guard, feigning calm. "I need to take these items to the disposal area," she lied. "Could you hold the door for me?" The guard, bored and oblivious, shrugged and stepped aside. Evangeline pushed the cart forward, biting her lip to keep her composure. She managed to get Melissa past the guard and into the rear parking lot. There, she helped Melissa stand, half carrying her toward a fence that lined the clinic's perimeter. Suddenly, a shout rang out. "Hey, stop!" They turned to see a figure approaching swiftly, one of Dr. Johnson's loyalists. Evangeline's heart lurched. She tugged Melissa's arm, urging her forward, but Melissa stumbled. "I can't run," she gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm too weak." Just when it seemed they'd be caught, headlights flared across the parking lot. A sleek car screeched to a halt, and the driver's door slammed open. It was James Harrington, fury etched into every line of his face. William Barrett sat in the passenger seat, equally determined. Evangeline waved frantically, relief flooding her. "Over here!" James and William sprinted toward them. James scooped Melissa into his arms, his eyes burning with rage and protectiveness. "I've got you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're safe now." Behind them, Dr. Johnson's lackey skidded to a halt. Seeing James Harrington and his friend, a man known for powerful connections, he made a split-second decision not to engage. He vanished back into the shadows of the clinic, perhaps to warn Dr. Johnson. Evangeline, trembling with relief, gasped, "Get her away from here, quickly!" James nodded, and with Melissa in his arms, he rushed her into the car. William opened the back door, and Evangeline slid in beside them. Tires squealed as the driver floored the accelerator, tearing away into the night. A swirl of emotions overwhelmed Melissa: fear, relief, anger, hope. Through half-lidded eyes, she looked at her husband. "James," she whispered, voice hoarse, "you came for me." His eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I'll never leave you again," he vowed. But even though they had escaped the clinic, the war was far from over. Caroline and Dr. Johnson would not relent easily. And now, James had to ensure Melissa's health and safety, and that of their unborn child, while bringing the conspirators to justice. They drove straight to an undisclosed private residence that William Barrett had arranged for emergencies, an apartment protected by tight security. The building, owned by one of William's close associates, was rarely frequented and had discreet medical equipment on site for anyone needing urgent care. Inside the penthouse apartment, James gently laid Melissa on a plush sofa. Her skin felt clammy, her eyelids fluttering. "We need a real doctor," he said urgently. William placed a call to a trusted physician he knew, Dr. Miriam Patel, a respected OB-GYN known for her integrity. Within an hour, Dr. Patel arrived, medical bag in tow. She examined Melissa thoroughly, checking her vital signs, listening to the fetal heartbeat with a portable Doppler. Her face grew serious as she concluded the examination. "She's severely dehydrated and appears to be suffering from the effects of some sedative," she explained to James. "But the baby's heartbeat is still strong. We need to keep her on bed rest, hydrate her, and monitor her closely." Relief swept through James. The baby was still alive. He knelt beside Melissa, cradling her hand. "We're safe now," he murmured, though a part of him knew that danger still loomed. While Melissa rested under Dr. Patel's watchful eye, James pulled William aside. "I need you to coordinate with the authorities. We have more than enough evidence, Melissa's testimony, Dr. Knight's statement, and proof of Dr. Johnson's wrongdoing." Caroline paid him off. William nodded. "I'll get in touch with my contacts. But be careful, Caroline and Dr. Johnson could still try to silence us." James's jaw set. "They can try, but we won't be silent." Meanwhile, in a penthouse across town, Caroline and Dr. Johnson convened in a hastily arranged meeting. Caroline was pacing back and forth, her face a mask of fury. "I underestimated James," she hissed. "He managed to break Melissa out." Dr. Johnson, tension etched across his brow, shrugged. "It's only a matter of time before the police come knocking. We need to cover our tracks." Caroline stared at him, her eyes hollow and desperate. "What can we do?" "Deny everything," Dr. Johnson replied coolly. "I'll claim Melissa's release was medically irresponsible. We'll shift the blame on you for forging documents." "Wait a minute," Caroline cut in, her voice climbing. "You want to throw me under the bus?" Dr. Johnson's eyes narrowed. "If it's your word against mine, I'm still the licensed physician. You'll come across as an obsessed woman, scorned. That's the narrative we'll push." Caroline felt panic rise in her throat. She had paid Dr. Johnson a fortune to orchestrate this farce, and now he was discarding her like trash. Realizing she needed her own leverage, she produced a folder of documents, bank statements, copies of forged test results, and incriminating text messages from Dr. Johnson. "Don't forget, I kept evidence," she warned. "If you try to make me the scapegoat, I'll take you down with me." They stood at an impasse, both silent, both furious. Eventually, Caroline sank into a chair, pressing her manicured fingers to her temple. "We should leave London," she breathed. "At least until the dust settles." Dr. Johnson nodded. "I can arrange a flight to Dubai. We can regroup there." As they made preparations to flee, James and William were busy coordinating with the authorities. Through William's extensive network, they secured a detective who specialized in white-collar crime and had ties to an influential judge. Within hours, an arrest warrant was filed against Dr. Johnson and Caroline Bishop for fraud, medical malpractice, and conspiracy to commit assault. Inside the safe penthouse, Dr. Patel finished setting up and the fourth drip for Melissa. She offered James a weary smile. "She'll make a full recovery, and the baby too, as long as she rests." James breathed a sigh of relief, brushing a strand of hair from Melissa's forehead. He then joined William in the makeshift command center they'd set up in the living room, a large table littered with folders, statements, and laptops. Evangeline hovered nearby, anxiously sipping a cup of tea. James turned to her. "If you hadn't helped Melissa escape, I don't know what would have happened." "Thank you," he said, sincerity brimming in his eyes. Evangeline nodded, tears glistening. "I only did what was right." They began organizing the evidence, printing copies of emails, phone records, and the forged medical reports. William typed furiously, compiling a digital timeline that detailed every significant event. Around midnight, they received a call from the detective. "Bad news," the detective said, voice crackling. "Looks like Caroline Bishop and Dr. Johnson have already disappeared. Their homes are empty, and they withdrew large sums of money from their accounts. My teams put out an alert at every airport, but they might slip away." A pang of frustration stabbed through James. "Please, do everything you can. My wife's life was nearly ruined by these people. They can't just walk away." The detective affirmed his commitment, and the call ended. James closed his eyes, exhaustion weighing on him. Caroline and Dr. Johnson might be on the run, but at least Melissa was safe for now. Once she regained her strength, they could publicly reveal the truth and sue them for damages. With a heavy sigh, James walked back to where Melissa lay, gently taking her hand. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with fatigue, but laced with gratitude when she recognized him. "The baby?" she whispered. He leaned down, kissing her knuckles. "Still with us," he said, voice tight with emotion. "You saved our child. Now rest, love. We have a lot of healing to do and a lot of justice to see served." She nodded weakly. Exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into a deep sleep. James kept vigil, resolved to protect her and their unborn child from further harm, no matter the cost. Outside, the city lights glowed, oblivious to the drama unfolding within this safe house. But for James, Melissa, and their allies, a quiet resolution formed. Truth would prevail, no matter how far Caroline and Dr. Johnson ran. In the following days, Melissa's recovery became everyone's primary focus. Dr. Patel visited frequently to monitor her health and the baby's growth. Under a steady regimen of vitamins, hydration, and proper rest, Melissa's strength returned. The color gradually came back to her cheeks, and she was finally able to smile without pain tugging at her features. Yet nightmares haunted her nights. She would jolt awake, gasping for air, haunted by images of being trapped in the clinic, of Dr. Johnson leaning over her with a syringe. Each time, James was there to hold her, whispering reassurances until she drifted off again. Meanwhile, William Barrett was relentless. He combed through every financial record tied to Caroline and Dr. Johnson. A pattern emerged. Large sums transferred between Caroline's offshore account and the doctor's private fund. The evidence was damning. Coupled with Dr. Knight's testimony, it formed a bulletproof case of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted harm against Melissa and her unborn child. As soon as Melissa was well enough, James arranged for a discreet meeting with a highly reputable journalist named Sophie Collins, known for her hard-hitting exposes on corruption among the elite. They planned to break the story publicly, ensuring that if Caroline and Dr. Johnson attempted to return, they'd face a media storm as well as legal charges. The interview took place in William's secure penthouse. Cameras were set up to capture Melissa's testimony. She was nervous, her fingers trembling as Sophie asked gentle questions. "Can you tell us in your own words what happened at Westwood Serenity Clinic?" Melissa took a shaky breath, glancing at James for reassurance. Then she began recounting the nightmare, her initial joy at discovering her pregnancy, Caroline's sudden interest, the forged documents, her confinement at the clinic. Sophie listened intently, her expression turning grim as the story progressed. When it was over, Sophie promised that the footage would remain secure until they were ready to publish. "I want to run a thorough investigation," she said. "We'll verify with Dr. Knight and any other witnesses. Once we have a rock-solid foundation, we'll release this to the public. Nobody, not even the Harrington family, should be above the law." James nodded in agreement. "I appreciate your diligence. My only concern is Melissa's privacy, but the truth needs to come out." A few days later, Sophie confirmed that Dr. Knight had given her an exclusive interview, detailing how Caroline had tried to bribe him and how he'd been attacked. Evangeline also went on record, providing her first-hand account of what happened at the clinic. The evidence was overwhelming. On a crisp Monday morning, the story broke. News outlets across London and soon internationally carried the headline, "Millionaire's pregnant wife declared infertile, doctor and mistress accused of conspiracy." Sophie's meticulously investigated article laid out the entire web of lies. The public was outraged by the cruelty and audacity of Caroline and Dr. Johnson. For the Harrington family, it was a mix of shame and relief. Some distant relatives bristled at the negative press, but most were horrified at what Melissa had endured. They rushed to apologize, offering support and condemnation of Caroline's actions. Some admitted to James they'd felt something was off, but had been too scared to speak up. Caroline and Dr. Johnson, however, remained in the wind. Interpol was now involved, as the pair had managed to slip through a private airfield out of the country. Rumors placed them in Dubai, but no one was certain. While the wheels of international law turned slowly, at least the world knew the truth. Melissa's name was cleared. No longer would she be whispered about as the unstable Harrington wife. The public rallied around her, sending supportive messages, gifts, and countless letters of compassion. Through it all, James stayed by her side, grappling with his own guilt for having doubted her. One afternoon, while Melissa was resting on a chaise lounge near the penthouse balcony, he knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her growing belly. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "I failed you when you needed me most." She placed her hand over his. "You came back for me." she said softly. "You saved me and our baby. That's all that matters now." They shared a quiet moment, the sun dipping below the skyline. Outside, the city continued its hustle, but in that penthouse, they found a moment of peace. They both knew that healing, both physical and emotional, would take time, but at least they were free to walk that road together, without shadows of deception lurking around every corner. Sometime later, they would leave that penthouse. They'd reclaim the Harrington mansion, purge it of every reminder of Caroline's presence, and build a nursery for the child that symbolized not just their future, but their triumph over betrayal. Yet even as they prepared to move on, they knew the final confrontation with Caroline and Dr. Johnson lay in wait. For the time being, though, life gave them a reprieve, a chance to catch their breath, and to treasure the simple fact that they were still a family, unbroken and determined to overcome the scars of the past. Months passed, and Melissa's pregnancy progressed smoothly under Dr. Patel's diligent care. Each sonogram brought new joy and fresh hope. James was unwavering in his devotion, attending every appointment, reading parenting books, and pampering Melissa with anything she desired. He remained ever anxious to make up for what she'd suffered. The scandal surrounding Caroline and Dr. Johnson had gradually faded from the front pages, replaced by fresher controversies. Yet the authorities had not forgotten. An international arrest warrant remained active. Interpol agents tracked leads in Dubai, Morocco, and even remote Mediterranean ports. Then came the lead everyone had been waiting for. Caroline Bishop had been spotted in the south of France, reportedly using a false identity, Dr. Johnson was nowhere in sight, hinting they might have split to cover their tracks. At once, the Harrington family's legal team mobilized. Working with French authorities, they arranged for Caroline's arrest. It took weeks of surveillance, but eventually she was apprehended at a luxurious villa in Nice. News of Caroline's capture broke on a brisk autumn morning. Melissa was reading quietly in the newly refurbished sunroom at the Harrington mansion when James rushed in. "They've got her," he said, breathless with excitement and relief. "French police just confirmed it. Caroline's in custody." Melissa set her book aside, feeling a mixture of triumph and lingering sorrow. Despite everything, there was a time when she'd considered Caroline a friend, or at least an acquaintance. "What about Dr. Johnson?" she asked quietly. James shook his head. Still no sign of him, but at least Caroline will face justice. Within days, Caroline was extradited to England. Tabloids once again ran the sensational story, capturing her arrival in handcuffs, escorted by stern-faced officers. She looked pale, thinner than before, but still clung to an air of defiance. Undercover reporters outside the courthouse shouted questions, seeking any comment from her. She kept her lips pressed shut, refusing to engage. In the days that followed, Caroline's lawyers attempted a barrage of legal maneuvers to have the case dismissed. They cited everything from insufficient evidence to media bias. But the prosecution's case was robust. Dr. Knight's testimony about the bribery, Evangeline's account of the clinic's malpractice, records of the secret payments, and the violent assault on Dr. Knight. A pre-trial hearing made it clear that Caroline's prospects were bleak. Detectives were still searching for Dr. Johnson, and though his absence complicated matters, the evidence against Caroline alone remained overwhelming. Faced with near-certain conviction, Caroline's lawyers approached the prosecution about a plea deal. They hinted she'd be willing to reveal Dr. Johnson's whereabouts or any additional conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Through the Harrington's counsel, James and Melissa were informed of this possibility. Melissa hesitated at the thought of giving Caroline any leniency. After all, Caroline had endangered her life and the life of her unborn child. But James, ever the pragmatist, weighed the benefits. If Caroline cooperated and Dr. Johnson could be apprehended, it would bring full closure. Ultimately, the Crown Prosecution Service decided to allow a partial deal. If Caroline provided verifiable information leading to Dr. Johnson's arrest and conviction, her sentencing might be reduced, but it was by no means a guarantee. On a grey morning, Caroline finally broke her silence, revealing she had parted ways with Dr. Johnson in Turkey months ago. She believed he might be hiding in Singapore under a forged identity. Investigations sprang into action, crossing borders to track down the elusive doctor. Public sentiment remained squarely against Caroline. She'd become a symbol of greed and betrayal, someone who had tried to destroy a pregnant woman's life to steal her husband and fortune. Paparazzi hounded every courthouse appearance, capturing pictures of Caroline's grim expression, escorted by guards, dressed in nondescript suits instead of the designer gowns she once flaunted. For Melissa, each headline served as a reminder of her ordeal. Though it stirred up difficult memories, she also found solace in knowing that justice was slowly prevailing. It reassured her that, in some measure, good could triumph over evil if people stood up for truth. As the trial date approached, Melissa's stomach had grown round and heavy, her due date drawing ever closer. Dr. Patel urged her to avoid stress, but she wanted to be present, if only to hear Caroline admit her guilt, to look her tormentor in the eye, and prove that she was no longer the powerless victim locked in a clinic cell. She was stronger now, carrying within her a life that represented hope and renewal. And so the stage was set for the final legal battle in court, where Caroline would face her reckoning, and where Melissa hoped to finally find closure and peace. The day of reckoning arrived in a swirl of legal formalities. London's High Court was packed with curious onlookers, reporters, and a small phalanx of photographers waiting outside. Metal detectors beeped incessantly as people filed in. The judge presiding over the case was known for a no-nonsense approach. Melissa entered the courtroom on James's arm, her pregnancy unmistakable beneath a flowing maternity dress. She was well into her third trimester, her cheeks flushed with the anxiety of the day's proceedings. Behind her walked William Barrett, Evangeline, and Dr. Knight, each prepared to testify. Caroline was already seated at the defense table, flanked by her lawyers. She avoided eye contact with the spectators, her once confident posture now sunken with resignation. The hum of whispers died down when the judge took his seat. Testimonies began. Dr. Knight recounted the day he confirmed Melissa's pregnancy, the subsequent assault, and the threats made on his life. Evangeline described the irregularities at Westwood's Serenity Clinic, the forcibly altered records, and how she helped Melissa escape. Melissa herself, voice steady despite her trembling hands, told the court about her confinement, how Dr. Johnson would gaslight her with false test results, and how Caroline manipulated the situation from the shadows. At several points, Caroline's defense objected or tried to question Melissa's mental state. But the forensic evidence was damning. Numerous forged documents bore Caroline's digital signature. Financial transactions linked directly to Dr. Johnson. Emails from Caroline's account spelled out instructions to declare Melissa infertile and keep her locked away. When the prosecution rested, the courtroom sat in heavy silence. Caroline's lawyer stood, pressing his lips into a thin line. He glanced at Caroline, who gave a small nod. "My client wishes to make a statement," he said. A hush fell as Caroline stood. She took a moment to gather herself, her hands shaking. For a moment, she seemed almost human vulnerable, stripped of her usual glamour. Then she spoke, her voice quavering. I did things I'm not proud of. I wanted James back, and I let my obsession blind me. But I never intended to physically harm Melissa or her child. I only wanted her out of the picture." She paused, swallowing hard. Dr. Johnson took things further than I expected. When I realized he planned to ensure she lost the baby, it was too late. 1. I accept responsibility for my part. An uneasy quiet followed. Melissa felt conflicting emotions twist in her chest. Part of her wanted to reject Caroline's last-minute remorse, to denounce it as nothing but an attempt to garner sympathy. Yet another part felt a sliver of pity for a woman who had become so consumed by envy and greed that she'd destroyed herself. The judge, unmoved by Caroline's trembling, passed sentencing after a brief deliberation. He cited overwhelming evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Though the final sentence was somewhat reduced due to her cooperation in revealing Dr. Johnson's whereabouts, Caroline still faced several years of prison time. Melissa gripped James's hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. It was over, at least this chapter. Caroline would be imprisoned, and Dr. Johnson, still at large, was now the subject of an intensified manhunt. One day, he too would answer for his crimes. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. James shielded Melissa from the cameras, but she offered a brief comment, "I'm grateful for the support and justice served. I hope this encourages anyone who's been wronged to speak up." That same afternoon, Melissa and James returned to the Harrington mansion, a place that had once felt haunted by lies. Now, it was infused with new energy. Staff greeted them warmly, expressing relief that the nightmare had reached a conclusion. Exhausted but relieved, Melissa sank into an armchair in the living room, gazing at the newly finished nursery painted with soft murals of forests and gentle animals. James knelt beside her, resting a hand on her stomach. Their baby gave a gentle kick, as if sensing the tension had finally passed. "It's all behind us now," James murmured, eyes filled with tenderness. "You, me, and our child, we can finally move forward." Melissa smiled, placing her hand atop his. "Let's leave the past where it belongs," she whispered, leaning in to rest her head against his shoulder. "We've got a new future to build." And so, with the final gavel echoing in their memories, the last remnants of Caroline's betrayal drifted away like a bad dream. What remained was a bond forged in adversity, stronger than ever, a family that refused to be torn apart by deception and cruelty. Their story would serve as a testament to love's resilience and a warning of the darkness that greed and envy could breed. In the end, justice prevailed. Melissa reclaimed her rightful place by James's side, protected by those who truly cared. Caroline Bishop's prison sentence served as a stark reminder that envy and greed lead only to ruin, while Dr. Johnson's downfall became inevitable as the international search closed in. Though the scars from this ordeal would not vanish overnight, Melissa and James emerged united and ready to welcome their child into a world where truth triumphed over deceit. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. If this story moved you, if you cheered for Melissa's triumph, felt the sting of betrayal, and savored the sweet taste of justice, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with your friends to spread the word that truth can conquer even the darkest lies. And of course, subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss another incredible real-life drama. Your support means everything.
A billion-dollar tech empire, a penthouse that scraped the New York sky, and his graceful, intelligent wife, Eleanor, who was carrying their first child. He was Julian Croft, a master of the universe. But one sentence from his mistress was all it took to set his perfect world on fire. "It's her or me, Julian," she'd whispered, her voice like velvet and poison. "Kick your pregnant wife out, or the secret that built your empire will be the secret that buries you." He made his choice, and as the heavy oak door clicked shut on Eleanor, her silhouette fragile against the city lights, he knew he hadn't just closed a door, he'd detonated his own life. The city unfolded beneath Julian Croft's penthouse like a circuit board of pulsing light. From the 56th floor of the Orion Tower on Central Park, West Manhattan, Was his kingdom a sprawling testament to his ambition? At 34, he possessed the kind of wealth that felt ancient inherited. But it wasn't. He had clawed his way to the top, building his tech company, Innovate Dynamics, from a garage in Queens into a global behemoth on the back of a revolutionary data encryption algorithm. He was the city's golden boy, his face a familiar sight on the covers of business magazines, his story a modern myth. And at the heart of that myth was Eleanor. Eleanor Croft née Vance was not the kind of woman one usually saw on the arm of a new money titan. She was not a model, not an heiress, not a socialite who lived for the flash of paparazzi bulbs. She was an architect, her mind as beautifully structured as the buildings she designed. Her elegance was quiet, her beauty found in the gentle curve of her smile and the intelligent light in her deep-set hazel eyes. She had met Julian not at a gala, but at a dreary city planning commission meeting where she was passionately defending the preservation of a historic library he had intended to buy and demolish. He'd been so captivated by her fire and conviction that he'd scrapped the project and asked her for dinner instead. Their love story was the bedrock of his public image, the ruthless businessman tamed by the principled artist, and for 5 years it had been blissfully true. Their home was a sanctuary of glass and steel, softened by Eleanor's touch, shelves overflowing with books, a grand piano in the corner she sometimes played, and walls adorned with architectural sketches instead of ostentatious art. Now, at 7 months pregnant, she was the very picture of serene fulfillment, the gentle swell of her belly beneath a cashmere dress, the promise of their next most precious joint venture. But for the last 3 months, a hairline crack had appeared in the foundation of their perfect life. It started subtly. Julian, who had always made a point of being home for dinner, began staying late at the office. "Finalizing the Axiom deal," he'd say, his voice strained over the phone. Then came the new scent, a cloying, expensive perfume, something floral and audacious, so unlike Eleanor's subtle woodsy fragrance. It clung to his suits, faint but unmistakable. "You smell like a florist's shop," she'd remarked lightly one evening, trying to keep the tremor of suspicion from her voice as she helped him with his jacket. Julian flinched, a barely perceptible tightening in his shoulders. "Sienna Hayes from marketing," he'd explained a little too quickly. "She practically bathes in the stuff. We were all crammed in the boardroom for hours." Sienna Hayes. The name was new. Julian's head of marketing was a staid 50-something man named Robert. "Did Robert retire?" Eleanor asked, smoothing a wrinkle on his lapel. Her touch lingering, seeking a connection that felt increasingly frayed. No. Hayes is his new senior VP. A real shark. Aggressive. Exactly what we need for the European launch." He turned away, loosening his tie, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional one. "God, I'm exhausted." The conversation was over, but Eleanor's unease remained, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She saw the way he now guarded his phone, angling the screen away from her, the device that was once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, now a constant protected presence in his pocket. She saw the charges on their shared credit card, from restaurants she'd never heard of, a jeweler on Fifth Avenue, where he hadn't bought her a gift, and a series of late-night Uber rides that didn't end at their building. Her heart ached with a terrible pressing weight. She was carrying their child, a daughter they had both desperately wanted. They had already designed the nursery, a celestial-themed room, painted in shades of midnight blue and silver, a mural of the cosmos, painstakingly sketched by Eleanor herself on the main wall. Julian had been so excited, spending a whole weekend assembling a ridiculously complex crib, his usual impatience giving way to a tender focus. Where was that man now? One rainy Tuesday, the lie became undeniable. Julian had called to cancel their dinner plans, their weekly tradition, at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown. Buried in quarterly reports, my love. I'll be lucky if I'm home by midnight. Don't wait up. An hour later, her sister Chloe, a razor-sharp litigator with a penchant for brutal honesty, sent her a photo. There was no text, just the image. It was a screenshot from an acquaintance's Instagram story. The photo was candid blurry, taken from across a crowded high-end cocktail bar. But the subjects were unmistakable. Julian leaning in close, a smile on his face she hadn't seen in months, his hand resting familiarly on the arm of a stunning woman with fiery red hair and a dress the color of blood. Her head was tilted back in laughter, her eyes fixed on him with a predatory gleam. The caption read, "Innovate Dynamics CEO, Julian Croft, and Marketing Guru, Sienna Hayes. Celebrating the new Axiom partnership. Power couple alert." Eleanor stared at the image, her breath catching in her throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just the lie. It was the casual intimacy, the public nature of it all. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a new life in plain sight. She felt the baby kick a sudden, sharp reminder of the innocent life caught in the crossfire of this looming disaster. Her first instinct was to shatter something, to scream, to call him, and unleash the torrent of pain and betrayal that was flooding her. But her second, stronger instinct took over the architect's instinct. To assess the damage, to understand the structural flaws, to find the truth, before the entire edifice came crashing down. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the completed nursery, the moonlight casting long shadows across the miniature galaxy on the wall. She ran her hand over the smooth, polished wood of the crib Julian had built. The cold reality was that a stranger named Sienna Hayes had more of her husband than she did. And as she sat there, cloaked in darkness, Eleanor Croft made a decision. She would not be a victim in her own home. She would fight for her marriage, for her family, and for the man she still loved. The man she prayed was simply lost, not gone forever. She just had to find out what or who had led him astray. Sienna Hayes operated not with the clumsy tactics of a home wrecker, but with the chilling precision of a corporate strategist. Her affair with Julian was a campaign, and Eleanor was not a rival to be defeated, but a market share to be captured. She had studied Julian for months before making her move, identifying his vulnerabilities as if they were key performance indicators. His primary weakness was a deep-seated insecurity, a fear that despite his billions, he was still the boy from Queens, perpetually afraid of being found out as an imposter among the old money aristocrats and Ivy League pedigrees. Sienna, with her flawless confidence and cut-glass accent that hinted at a European boarding school education, was his validation. She spoke his language, the ruthless dialect of acquisition and dominance. "Eleanor is your sanctuary," she told him one night, her fingers tracing the lapel of his $1,000 suit as they sat in a private booth at a members-only club. "But a king doesn't live in a sanctuary, Julian. He lives in a fortress. He needs a queen who can stand on the battlements with him, not one who's arranging flowers in the courtyard." She made him feel seen, not for the husband and father-to-be he was becoming, but for the insatiable conqueror he had been. She praised his most ruthless business decisions, ones Eleanor had questioned on moral grounds. She celebrated his extravagances, while Eleanor championed his philanthropy. Sienna was the devil on his shoulder, whispering that greed was good, that his ambition was a virtue, not a sin. The campaign escalated. Sienna began manufacturing professional crises that only Julian could solve. One evening, a frantic call came through just as he and Eleanor were sitting down for a rare, quiet dinner at home. "Julian, thank God." Sienna's voice was a perfect symphony of panic and capability. "The servers in the London office are down. The launch data for the Axiom integration is corrupted. We're talking a potential $100 million loss if we can't restore it before the market opens. London tech is useless. I need you." He was out of the door in 5 minutes, leaving Eleanor with a half-hearted apology and a plate of cooling pasta. He spent the entire night at the office with Sienna, the two of them working side by side, fueled by coffee and the electric thrill of the ticking clock. At dawn, they saved the day. The crisis, of course, was entirely fabricated by Sienna, a simple server reset she could have ordered with a single email blown up into a company-defining emergency. When Julian finally came home, smelling of stale coffee and Sienna's perfume, he was exhausted but buzzing. You should have seen her, Elle. Cool as a cucumber. A real killer instinct. Eleanor, who had spent the night sick with worry for both her husband and her marriage, felt a chill. He was admiring the very qualities in Sienna that were antithetical to their life together. He was falling in love with his own reflection in her ambitious eyes. The confrontation came a week later. Eleanor, armed with the Instagram photo and a growing list of suspicious credit card charges, decided she could no longer live with the slow poison of silence. She waited for him in the living room, the city lights twinkling indifferently behind her. She laid the evidence out on the marble coffee table. "I know Julian," she said, her voice quiet but firm, stripped of all accusation, leaving only the raw, painful fact. Julian's reaction was a masterclass in deflection and gaslighting. He didn't erupt in anger. He sighed a deep, weary sigh, as if her discovery were just another burden on his already overloaded shoulders. "Eleanor, please," he said, running a hand through his hair. "You're pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place. You can't seriously believe this. My hormones aren't creating credit card statements, Julian. They're not taking pictures of you in bars." "Sienna is a colleague," he said, his voice rising, taking on a tone of patronizing frustration. "A vital part of my company. Are we not allowed to celebrate a business deal? Are you so insecure that I can't have a professional relationship with another woman?" Her hand was on your arm. You were looking at her like... She trailed off, unable to voice the devastating comparison. "Like you used to look at me." "Like what?" He pressed his eyes cold. "You're being paranoid. This is exactly why I've been so stressed. I'm trying to close the biggest deal of my life, and I come home to these insane accusations. I thought you of all people would be on my side." He turned the tables with brutal efficiency. He was the victim, she the irrational, hormonal wife. He made her feel small, foolish, and guilty for her own pain. She started to question herself. Was she overreacting? Was she misinterpreting everything? The emotional whiplash was dizzying. He stormed off into their bedroom, slamming the door, leaving her alone in the cavernous living room, the evidence of his betrayal feeling flimsy and absurd under his withering denial. But doubt once planted is a hardy weed. The next morning, Julian was overly solicitous, bringing her breakfast in bed, kissing her forehead, telling her he was sorry for being so stressed. It was a performance, and for the first time, Eleanor could see the strings. While he was in the shower, her hands shaking, she did something she had never done before. She took his phone. His password, once their anniversary had been changed. She tried her birthday. Nothing. On a gut-wrenching hunch, she typed in Sienna's birthday, which she'd found with a quick search of the company's online newsletter. The phone unlocked. Her heart felt like it had turned to lead. The screen opened to his text messages with Sienna. It wasn't just flirtation. It was an intro to a parallel life. Hundreds of messages filled with private jokes, intimate plans, and scathing remarks about their life together. Sienna. Stuck in that meeting with the board, Julian agony. All I can think about is your apartment last night. Sienna. You need to be here. I'm wearing that dress you like. Julian. Don't tempt me. Another thrilling evening of prenatal vitamins and nursery rhymes awaits. Sienna, poor baby. Let me know when you escape the domestic bliss. I'll have a real drink waiting. The most recent message sent just an hour ago from their very own bed made her physically sick. Julian. She was asking questions last night. Getting suspicious. Sienna, handle it. Don't let her be a problem. Julian, we're too close to getting everything we want. Everything we want. It wasn't a fling. It was a plan. Eleanor placed the phone back on the nightstand. Her movements slow and deliberate, a strange, cold calm settling over her. The man she loved, the father of her child, was a stranger. The betrayal was no longer a crack in the foundation. It was a sinkhole, and it was pulling her under. But as she stood there, with the sound of the shower running in the background, a new feeling began to eclipse the pain resolve. Her sister Chloe's words echoed in her mind. Never let a man make you doubt your own reality. The truth is your weapon. Eleanor walked out of the bedroom, leaving the unlocked phone on the nightstand like a ticking bomb. She now knew the serpent's name. It was time to find out just how venomous its bite was. The next few weeks were a landscape of quiet horror. Julian, believing he had successfully quelled the rebellion, moved through their home with a detached, placid kindness that was more chilling than any argument. He was a ghost in his own life, his body present, but his soul clearly elsewhere. Eleanor, meanwhile, played the part of the placated wife, a role that chafed against her soul. She was now 8 months pregnant, her body heavy and weary, a constant living reminder of the family Julian was so willing to discard. Every gentle kick from her daughter felt like a tiny accusation, a question she couldn't answer. How could you let this happen? Sienna's campaign entered its final brutal phase. She was no longer content to be a secret. She wanted to be a successor. She began to subtly insert herself into their lives, a phantom presence designed to unnerve Eleanor. A bouquet of lilies, Sienna's favorite flower, which Eleanor was allergic to, would arrive at the penthouse with a card simply signed, "From an admirer." A reservation Eleanor made for their anniversary dinner would be mysteriously cancelled, only for her to find out Julian was attending a last-minute company retreat organized by Sienna. It was psychological warfare, designed to make Eleanor feel like a guest in her own life, to wear down her spirit until she simply gave up. But Eleanor did not break. She documented everything, every text message she managed to see, every suspicious charge, every lie. She and Chloe were building a case, though, for what Eleanor wasn't yet sure. A divorce, a battle for custody. The future felt like a terrifying, formless void. The breaking point arrived on a cold, sleeting Thursday. Julian was in Chicago for a tech conference, or so he said. Eleanor was in the nursery applying the final touches of silver paint to the stars on the ceiling when the intercom buzzed. It was the front desk. "Mrs. Croft. A Ms. Sienna Hayes is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of it stole her breath. This was a violation of the deepest kind, a predator breaching the final wall of her sanctuary. For a moment, she considered refusing, but a stronger, colder curiosity won out. She wanted to see her enemy, to look into the eyes of the woman who had so masterfully dismantled her life. "Send her up," Eleanor said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. Sienna Hayes walked into the penthouse as if she owned it. She was even more striking in person than in the blurry photograph. Tall and slender, with hair the color of autumn leaves, she wore a sharp, tailored pantsuit that screamed power. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, swept the room, with a look of dismissive appraisal finally landing on Eleanor's swollen belly. A flicker of something contempt perhaps crossed her face, before being replaced by a polished, insincere smile. "Eleanor, I'm Sienna. I'm so glad we can finally talk woman to woman." "I doubt there's anything you and I have to talk about," Eleanor replied, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Oh, I think there is," Sienna said, strolling over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to Eleanor. "We need to talk about the future. Julian's future." She turned, her smile gone, her expression now one of cold, hard business. "You're a lovely woman, Eleanor. Classic. Elegant. But you are an anchor on a rocket ship. You are holding him back, tying him to this domestic world when he's meant to conquer the real one. The world you and he conquer in hotel rooms and cocktail bars." Eleanor shot back, her temper flaring. Sienna laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Don't be naive. This was never just about sex. This is about a partnership. I understand his ambition. You fear it. I encourage his ruthlessness. You try to temper it. We are the same. You are his past." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And that's really what I'm here to talk about. The past." She reached into her expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a slim file folder, placing it on the marble coffee table, the same table where Eleanor had confronted Julian weeks before. "Julian is a genius," Sienna began. "But when he was young, he was also reckless. Before Innovate Dynamics became the giant it is today, it was a struggling startup. And to get his initial seed funding, he had to push out his original partner, a man named Michael Vance." Eleanor froze. Michael Vance was her uncle, her father's estranged younger brother. She hadn't seen him in years, not since a bitter family feud had torn them apart. He was a brilliant but volatile programmer who had struggled with addiction and financial ruin. "Your uncle," Sienna continued, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Julian told me the whole story, how Michael was a liability, how he had to be cut loose for the good of the company, a standard if sad business story. But Julian, in his haste, left a paper trail, a very, very messy one. Contracts that were backdated, emails that suggest coercion. It wouldn't just be a civil suit, Eleanor. With the right spin, it could easily look like criminal fraud." She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of documents, emails, and what looked like a signed affidavit from a disgruntled former employee. "This," Sienna said, tapping the folder, "is the secret that built Julian's empire. The original sin. And I have the original copies. If this were to be leaked to the press or to the SEC, Innovate Dynamics would be crippled overnight. Julian would be ruined, publicly humiliated. He could even face jail time." Eleanor stared at her, her mind reeling. She felt sick. This was the leverage. This was the weapon Sienna had been sharpening all this time. "What do you want?" Eleanor whispered, though she already knew the answer. Sienna's smile returned cold and victorious. "The choice is very simple. I want you to disappear. You will pack your bags, you will leave this apartment, and you will sign a document stating the separation is mutual and that you waive all future claims to the Croft estate. In return, this folder remains a private matter between me and Julian." She paused, letting the weight of the threat settle. "But if you refuse," she went on, her voice like ice, "if you fight this, if you try to make a scene or go after him in a divorce, I will burn his kingdom to the ground, and you and your baby will be left with nothing but the ashes." It was the perfect diabolical trap. To save herself, she would have to destroy Julian. To protect him, she would have to destroy herself. Sienna's final words were the cruelest cut of all. "He's on his way back from Chicago now. He'll be here in 2 hours. He is going to ask you to leave. For his sake and the sake of your child, you need to go without a fight. Let him believe it was his decision. It will be cleaner that way. Don't worry. I'll be here to help him pick up the pieces." 2 hours later, Julian walked in. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He couldn't look at her. The words, when they came, were clumsy, rehearsed, and utterly devastating. "Eleanor, this isn't working," he stammered, standing by the door like a stranger. "We're not happy. I'm not happy. I don't love you anymore. I think the baby was a mistake." Every word was a perfectly calibrated blow designed to shatter her completely, to make her believe this was about a lack of love, not a hostage negotiation. He walked past her into their bedroom and began pulling her suitcases from the closet. He packed them himself, his movements stiff and robotic, piling in the maternity clothes the books from her nightstand, the framed photo of their wedding day. Eleanor stood frozen in the living room, Sienna's threat echoing in her ears. She watched as the man she loved methodically erased her from his life. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. He was choosing his empire over his family. He was choosing Sienna over her and their unborn child. When he was done, he dragged the suitcases to the door. He handed her a purse into which he had stuffed a thick wad of cash. It was a final, insulting severance payment. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the arrangements," he said, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on the wall above her head. He opened the door. The sleet was still coming down, and the wind howled in the hallway. He didn't offer to call her a cab. He didn't ask where she would go. He just stood there, holding the door open, waiting for her to leave. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Eleanor walked past him, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing her tears. As she stepped out into the hallway, the door clicked shut behind her. The sound was finite, absolute. A life, a love, a future, all terminated in a single metallic click. The moment the door clicked shut, the silence that flooded the penthouse was absolute and terrifying. It wasn't just the absence of Eleanor's soft movements or the low hum of the television she often had on. It was a profound, soul-crushing emptiness. The air, which moments before had been thick with tension and unshed tears, was now thin and sterile. Julian stood with his hand still on the doorknob, his knuckles white. He had done it. He had followed Sienna's script to the letter. He had uttered the cruelest, most unforgivable words. He had packed his pregnant wife's bags and cast her out into the cold. He had saved his empire. So why did he feel like he was dying? His gaze fell upon the indentation on the sofa where Eleanor had been sitting. He saw the book she'd been reading face down on the end table. His eyes drifted towards the hallway that led to the nursery, the galaxy she had painted for their daughter, seeming to mock him from the shadows. The baby was a mistake. The words echoed in his head, his own voice, a venomous hiss. He felt a wave of nausea so intense he had to grip the door frame for support. He had expected to feel relief, a grim, necessary relief. The feeling of a surgeon who has just amputated a limb to save a life. Instead, all he felt was a phantom limb pain of the soul, a raw, gaping wound where the best part of himself used to be. The regret was not a slow, dawning realization. It was a physical blow, instant and incapacitating. He had just traded a masterpiece for a forgery, and the scale of his idiotic bargain was crashing down on him all at once. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling, and called Sienna. He needed to hear her voice to have her reassure him that this agony was a necessary price, that their glorious future was now secure. She answered on the second ring, but her voice was different. The sultry conspiratorial warmth was gone, replaced by a cool, brisk efficiency. "It's done," she asked. There was no sympathy. "Are you okay? Just a bottom-line inquiry." "Yes," Julian choked out. "She's gone." "Good," Sienna said. "I'll be over in an hour. We have work to do. I've had my assistant draw up a power of attorney document. We need to start restructuring your personal asset portfolio immediately to shield it from any potential legal blowback. I'll handle everything." There it was. Not "I'll be there to hold you," but "I'll be there to manage your assets." The seductress was gone, and the corporate raider had taken her place. He was no longer a partner. He was an acquisition. He hung up the phone, a cold dread seeping into his bones, a dread that was even more profound than the grief. He had not been saved. He had just been captured. Eleanor did not go far. She dragged her suitcases down the hallway to the elevator, her body moving on pure, numb autopilot. The tears she had held back now flowed freely, silent streams carving paths down her cold cheeks. The doorman, a kind older man named George, who had always treated her with warmth, looked at her with pity and confusion as he hailed her a cab. "Everything all right, Mrs. Croft?" he asked. His brow furrowed with concern as he loaded her bags into the trunk. She couldn't speak. She just nodded a pathetic, jerky motion and climbed into the back of the taxi. She gave the driver the only address she could think of her sister's. Chloe Vance lived in a pre-war building in Brooklyn. Her apartment a cozy, chaotic space filled with law books and rescue plants. She opened the door and took in the scene, Eleanor pale and tear-streaked, flanked by a mountain of luggage, and her lawyer's mind immediately assessed the situation as worst-case scenario. Without a word, she pulled her sister into a fierce hug, guiding her inside and kicking the door shut. For the next hour, as Chloe made tea and wrapped a warm blanket around her, Eleanor recounted the entire horrifying story, from Sienna's ultimatum to Julian's cold, scripted dismissal. Chloe listened, her expression growing harder and colder with every word. She wasn't just a sister. She was a fighter, a litigator who smelled weakness and deceit like a shark smells blood in the water. "He said the baby was a mistake," Chloe asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Eleanor nodded, a fresh wave of sobs shaking her. "No," Chloe said, her eyes narrowing. "No, that's not Julian. That's a man reading a script written by a sociopath. He's weak and he's a coward, but he's not that cruel. He's being threatened." "She has evidence, Chloe," Eleanor cried, "about Uncle Michael. She said she could ruin him." "Michael Vance." Chloe's eyes lit up with a forensic spark. "The family black sheep." The one Dad said was a brilliant coder, but couldn't be trusted to water a plant. The same one, Eleanor whispered. This story has holes in it. Chloe said, standing up and beginning to pace. Big ones. Sienna Hayes isn't just a mistress. No one goes to these lengths for an affair. This is personal. This is a targeted attack. The affair was just the infiltration phase. She stopped pacing and looked at her sister, her expression firm. You are not going to crumble. You are not going to hide. We are not going to let this woman win. You're going to drink this tea, you're going to get some sleep, and in the morning we start digging. We're going to find out who Sienna Hayes really is. And dig they did. Chloe called in favors from private investigators and paralegals who owed her. They ran deep background checks, searched financial records, and cross-referenced old articles. For 2 days, the sisters worked out of Chloe's apartment, a war room fueled by caffeine and a burning desire for justice. The first breakthrough came from a public record search on Sienna's name. There was no record of a Sienna Hayes attending any of the prestigious European schools she alluded to on her company bio. Her social security number had only been active for the last 5 years. It was as if she had sprung into existence fully formed with the sole purpose of entering Julian's orbit. The real bombshell came from the private investigator. He had been looking into Michael Vance, trying to trace his whereabouts after he was forced out of the company. He had found him not in disgrace, but living quietly in Oregon, running a small but successful software consultancy firm. The investigator had also unearthed something else. Michael Vance had a daughter who had been a teenager when her father lost his company, who had watched her family's life implode. A daughter who, after a messy period in her youth, had legally changed her name 10 years ago. Her birth name was not Sienna Hayes. It was Sienna Vance. Chloe slammed the file down on her dining table. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Eleanor stared at the name, her mind struggling to connect the dots. Sienna Vance, my cousin. Your vengeful, brilliant, and utterly ruthless cousin, Chloe corrected her, her voice a mixture of horror and admiration. This isn't about business. This isn't about love. This is a blood feud. She's not trying to get Julian. She's trying to annihilate him. And she used you, his biggest vulnerability, to get the access she needed to do it. The truth was more shocking than any simple affair. Eleanor had been a pawn in a long, patient game of revenge. Sienna hadn't just stolen her husband. She had weaponized her entire life against her. And now, holding all the power, she was about to pull the trigger. While Eleanor and Chloe were uncovering the truth, Julian was living through the consequences of his choices. Sienna had moved into the penthouse, but not as a lover. She was an occupying force. The space that had once been a home was now her corporate command center. Her clothes filled Eleanor's side of the closet. Her severe modern art replaced Eleanor's architectural sketches, and the grand piano was draped with a dust cover silenced. Armed with the power of attorney, Julian had foolishly signed in a daze of regret and fear. Sienna worked with brutal efficiency. She wasn't just restructuring his assets. She was liquidating them. She sold off his personal stock portfolio, redirecting the funds into accounts he couldn't access. She put his collection of classic cars up for auction. She was systematically dismantling the personal empire he had built, severing him from his own wealth, while leaving the public-facing company Innovate Dynamics temporarily untouched. It was a careful, strategic demolition. She was taking everything that was his, leaving him as nothing but a figurehead of a corporation he no longer truly controlled. Julian was a prisoner in his own gilded cage. He confronted her, his voice a mixture of rage and desperation. "What are you doing, Sienna? This isn't what we agreed. You were supposed to protect me." She had looked up from her laptop, her green eyes utterly devoid of the passion they once held. "I am protecting our interests, Julian," she'd said, her voice like chipping ice. "Your personal life was a liability. I'm just cleaning it up. You should be thanking me." He realized then the full extent of his miscalculation. He had handed the keys of the kingdom to his own usurper. The threat of exposing the Michael Vance deal was her permanent leverage, a gun she kept pressed to his head, ensuring his compliance as she bled him dry. He was trapped, humiliated, and utterly alone. He tried calling Eleanor multiple times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He deserved it. He knew. He had thrown her away. He had no right to expect her to save him now. In Brooklyn, however, a different kind of strategy was forming. Eleanor, galvanized by the revelation of Sienna's true identity, had moved past grief and into a cold, focused anger. This was no longer just about her and Julian. This was about family betrayal and the protection of her unborn child's legacy from a woman consumed by a twisted vendetta. "We can't just expose her for who she is," Chloe argued, pacing her apartment. "It becomes a messy family drama. She'll leak the documents about Michael out of pure spite, and Julian still goes down. We need to neutralize her weapon before we attack her." The key was Michael Vance. Chloe found a number for his consultancy in Oregon and made the call. She explained who she was, who Eleanor was, and what his daughter was doing. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. "I haven't spoken to Sienna in almost a decade," Michael finally said, his voice raspy with emotion. "I knew she was ambitious, but I never thought she held on to that much hate." Chloe pressed him. "The deal, Michael. The one where Julian pushed you out. Sienna is using it as leverage. She's claiming it was fraudulent, coercive." Another pause. "It wasn't," Michael said, surprising them both. "It was brutal, yeah. Julian was a shark. But it wasn't illegal. I was a mess back then, Chloe. A drunk. A liability. I was about to run the company into the ground. Julian's final offer, the one he forced me to sign, it actually saved me. It was more than my share was worth, and it forced me to get clean. He bought me out to save the company, not to steal it." This was the missing piece. The foundation of Sienna's entire scheme was a lie, or at least a malicious twisting of the truth. "Did you sign an NDA?" Chloe asked, her mind racing. "Of course," Michael said, "but given what my daughter is doing to my niece, I think I can be persuaded to set the record straight." The plan came together quickly. Michael agreed to fly to New York and sign a new affidavit, one that clarified the context of his departure and exonerated Julian of any criminal wrongdoing. It would turn Sienna's weapon into a dud. The final confrontation was set not in a courtroom, but in the heart of Julian's empire, the main boardroom of Innovate Dynamics. Chloe, acting as Eleanor's legal counsel, requested an emergency meeting with Julian and Sienna to discuss the terms of the separation. Sienna, assuming she held all the cards and eager to finalize her victory, readily agreed. Eleanor walked into that boardroom feeling a strength she had never known. Her pregnancy was no longer a vulnerability. It was her armor. She was fighting for more than just herself. She was fighting for her daughter. Julian was already there, looking like a ghost in his own chair at the head of the table. Sienna sat beside him, radiating smug triumph. "Let's make this quick," Sienna said, addressing Chloe. "Sign the papers, Eleanor gets her severance, and we can all move on." I'm afraid it's not that simple, Chloe said, placing her briefcase on the table. We're here to discuss a different matter, a matter of fraud, identity theft, and corporate espionage. Sienna's smile flickered. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you? Eleanor said, speaking for the first time, her voice clear and strong. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze holding both sorrow and steel. Julian, the story you told Sienna about my uncle Michael Vance. You left out the most important part. You didn't just push him out. You saved him from himself. She turned her gaze to Sienna. But you knew that, didn't you, Sienna? Or should I say, Sienna Vance. The name dropped into the silent room like a grenade. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the woman beside him. Sienna's face went white. The mask of cool control shattered, revealing the raw, ugly hatred beneath. He ruined my father, she hissed, her voice shaking with years of pent-up rage. He took everything from us. No, a voice said from the doorway. All heads turned. Standing there was Michael Vance, looking older, weathered, but sober and clear-eyed. He didn't ruin me, sweetheart, Michael said, walking slowly into the room. I almost ruined myself. Julian made a hard choice, and it was the right one. Your whole life has been dedicated to avenging a crime that never happened. Chloe placed Michael's newly signed affidavit on the table. This document clarifies the full context of Mr. Vance's departure from the company. It confirms no fraud took place. We also have records of every asset you've illegally liquidated and a sworn statement from your former assistant about the server crisis you fabricated. It's over, Sienna. Sienna stared at the affidavit, then at her father, then at Julian, her expression a maelstrom of shock and fury. She had lost. Her life's grand project, her intricate revenge had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. As the full weight of her failure crashed down on her, Eleanor suddenly gasped, her hands flying to her stomach. A sharp, undeniable pain shot through her. She gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table, her knuckles turning white. Chloe! She breathed, her eyes wide with panic. The baby. It's coming. The chaos of the boardroom dissolved into the sterile, focused urgency of a hospital. The high-stakes corporate drama was rendered meaningless by the primal, overwhelming reality of childbirth. Julian, jolted from his stupor by Eleanor's cry of pain, was a mess of frantic, useless energy until Chloe fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. Make yourself useful. Get the car. Now! Sienna Vance simply faded away. Faced with the combined testimony of her father and Chloe's meticulously assembled evidence, she vanished from the boardroom, from the penthouse, from their lives. The legal battle that followed was swift and brutal. She faced multiple charges, and with her father refusing to support her lies, her fall was as spectacular as her ambition had been. The news of the vengeful Vance heiress was a brief, salacious story in the financial papers, a footnote to the drama she had tried to orchestrate. Julian's empire was wounded, but not destroyed. He lost a significant portion of his personal fortune, the cars, the stocks, the cash Sienna had siphoned away. But it was a cleansing fire. As he sat in the stark, uncomfortable waiting room of the maternity ward, the numbers on a screen meant nothing to him. For years, his net worth had been the primary measure of his existence. Now it felt like monopoly money. The only assets that mattered were in a room down the hall, fighting a battle he had so selfishly complicated. Hours later, a nurse called his name. He walked legs unsteady to the nursery viewing window. And there she was, a tiny, perfect infant swaddled in a pink blanket, her face red and scrunched in sleep. their daughter. He looked at the name card on the bassinet, Aria Grace Croft. A name Eleanor had chosen. Grace. The one thing he hadn't shown. Through the glass, he could see into Eleanor's room. She was exhausted, pale, but radiant. Chloe was by her side, holding her hand. Michael Vance stood near the door, his expression one of profound, sorrowful regret. He had found his family again in the wreckage his daughter had created. Julian watched them for a long time, an invisible wall of his own making, separating him from the scene of love and relief. He had almost lost this. In his foolish, arrogant pursuit of more, he had nearly thrown away everything. He had betrayed the one person who had loved him for who he was, not what he had. The regret was no longer a sharp, instant pain. It was a deep, permanent ache that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. It was a weight he deserved to bear. Finally, he took a breath and pushed the door to her room open. The conversation stopped. 3 pairs of eyes turned to Babu. Him! Michael gave him a slight, complicated nod and quietly led Chloe out of the room, giving them space. He was alone with Eleanor. She looked at him, her hazel eyes not with hatred, but with a profound, heartbreaking weariness. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Yes, she is." Eleanor replied, her voice soft, but not weak. He took a hesitant step closer. "Eleanor, There are no words. Sorry is an insult to what I did. I was a coward. I was weak. I let her poison my mind because I was afraid of losing the things that don't matter. And in doing that, I lost the only thing that ever did." He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just stated the truth, owning the full, catastrophic depth of his failure. Eleanor watched him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't just lie to me, Julian. You believed the lies. You stood there and told me our child was a mistake. It was the cruelest thing I have ever said." He admitted, tears welling in his eyes. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to unsay it with my actions. If you'll let me." He stopped at the foot of her bed, knowing he had no right to come closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. And I will understand if you want me gone. I will give you anything, the company, the penthouse, everything. It's all yours. Just, please let me be a father to her. Let me earn the right to be in her life." He was surrendering everything, not as a bargain, but as penance. For the first time, he was acting not out of fear or ambition, but out of love, a desperate, humble, and unconditional love for the child in the bassinet and the woman in the bed. Eleanor was silent for a long time. The only sound, the soft beeping of the hospital machines. The path forward was not clear. A scar had been carved into the heart of their family, and it would never fully disappear. A happily ever after was a fantasy. But as she looked at the broken, humbled man before her, she saw a flicker of the person she had first fallen in love with. The man who, once he recognized his own monumental error, was willing to burn his own world down to make it right. "The first step," she said. Finally, her voice quiet but firm, "is you find a new place to live. And then you can come visit her. We'll start there." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it wasn't a dismissal either. It was a beginning. A long, uncertain, and difficult road to redemption. As Julian looked at his wife and their daughter, the true meaning of wealth finally became clear. It wasn't about the numbers in a bank account. It was about the grueling day-by-day work of rebuilding trust, of earning grace, of becoming a man worthy of the family he had almost destroyed. And for the first time in a very long time, Julian Croft was ready to do the work. The collapse was spectacular, but what comes after the fall? True regret is not just a feeling, it's an action. The story of Julian, Eleanor, and Sienna is a raw, gripping reminder that the cost of betrayal is always higher than the price of loyalty, and that true strength is often forged in the fires of the deepest heartbreak. Can a man who has committed the ultimate betrayal ever truly earn his way back? Is forgiveness possible? Or are some wounds simply too deep to heal? If their journey of ruin, resilience, and the fragile hope for redemption captivated you, please show your support for stories like this. Hit that like button to let us know you were here. Share this story with someone who loves a drama that feels all too real, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more tales of love loss and the long, winding road to redemption. What do you think Eleanor should do next? Let us know in the comments below.